Hello, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is Real Talk with Shan and Bilal. This is Bilal.
This is Sean.
And today what we're going to be talking about is the disorderly cabinet of Donald Trump. But before we get into that, we want to give some shout-outs to Bishen. Bishen has been helping us out with the podcast. He has been helping to edit our work, and last time there were some technical difficulties with actually getting it uploaded, and he helped us sort that out. And we also want to give a shout out to Anaga. She gave us the idea of making smaller podcasts about 10 to 20 minutes long that we will be uploading on our own. And what this will be is like just my perspective and just Sean's perspective on news as it breaks.
Exactly. We're going to be producing more shorts.
Yeah.
And while we're going to still continue the regular podcast with the 1 hour podcasts, we're also going to do shorts on cultural issues, personal issues, what we've read, what we're seeing in the news, more of our personal opinions than we'll convey in the podcast. So be sure to be on the lookout for those. That's going to be a new addition to our podcast series.
This is always going to stay, but we also want to do that to keep the content up. Just because those are going to be easier to make, and we also feel like that'd be a different perspective. It's not just going to be our view on politics. It'll be like art, literature, stuff like that.
So with that, we will begin. And before we begin, quick thanks to Bishen and Anaga once more.
Yeah. Dude, they're the MVPs, right? Okay, so as I mentioned, the topic for today is the disorderly cabinet. So with the various hirings and firings in Trump's cabinet, we find it to be very unique. And he's been shuffling around a lot of the members to the point where we don't know if the decisions are either intentional power plays or are under duress due to power struggles. So as always, we have the two topics. Topic number 1 is going to be House of Turds, and topic number 2 is going to be construction and deconstruction of the cabinet. So the first part is going to deal with the people that have already been forced out of or have voluntarily left the administration, and the second part is going to be the people that are still in it and how they're working with the president. So Sean, why don't you start us off, since I gave the introduction, about topic number 1, which is the people that have been fired from the Trump administration.
So our first topic, pretty fittingly titled House of Tards. Is Trump doing this? Is Trump firing people due to genuine doubts about the faculty, in his faculty's ability to work, or is there a massive tug of war of influence?
Before we actually get into that, did I say House of Turds instead of House of Tards?
It's Tards. It's supposed to be in play on House of Cards.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So you were saying?
Yeah. So basically, just a bit of context. I want to just say something before we get started on this topic. Trump, not just before he was elected as president, even before his campaign, he said whenever he would hire people for his company, for his administration, not like outside of the White House, just for his company specifically, he always emphasized on hiring the best people who are best able to perform their duties. But with the recent firings, with the firings that has started since Sally Yates, who was, I believe, the first person who was the acting attorney general of the Obama administration carrying through the Trump administration, who was fired, and since then the latest was Tom Price, who resigned. It just shows a reoccurring theme in the string of firings/resignings occurring in Trump's White House that shows that they're not adequately prepared to take on the responsibilities that Trump had assigned them with.
So talking about these people that weren't able to handle the responsibilities, I think it's kind of impossible to ignore Reince Priebus, who was the chief of staff from the beginning, all the way up until July 31st. Now, the thing is with Reince Priebus, I feel like he was kind of the control put on Trump right as he was elected president to like moderate him and keep him connected with the party. Like, obviously, he kind of like went off on his own thing, so the Republicans said, okay, we're going to take a former chair of the Republican National Convention to get you under control, basically. And there's one picture that we will link down in the bottom, or if Bishen helps us out, which he hopefully will put up in the background. It's of, Donald Trump, Steve Bannon, Mike Pence, and like a couple other cabinet members. All of them have been fired except for Pence and Trump, and the only one that's one of the first ones that was fired from that picture was Reince Priebus. Now he went pretty far, July 31st, compared to other people. That's pretty commendable. But even then, the fact that you don't fire your chief of staff, or did he resign? Actually, I forget.
Reince Priebus, he was fired, I am pretty sure. I don't think he resigned. Because the people who resigned, well, Tom Price is definitely someone who resigned. I think Gorka also resigned. Sean Spicer may have also resigned. Those are the people that I remember who resigned. Michael Flynn as well. Michael Flynn was, I think, the most prolific person who resigned.
Yeah, the thing was with Mike Flynn, you don't. We expected the administration kind of to be the name we expect, like the people with the names we expected to stay. So when Michael Flynn, who's been in politics before, he knows what he's doing, or we thought, when he resigned, everyone was like, okay, something's up, and that's kind of what started the Russian investigation. The very first one, 10 days in, was Sally Yates. Now, Sally Yates was the acting attorney general, and she was fired. Now, when we're talking about this, there's kind of no way to avoid, at least for the first couple, all the way up until, you could really say, Mark Carollo.
Mark Carollo, yeah.
Mark Carollo. All of those were kind of just based around the Trump investigation. So up until about May, that's what all of the firings were about, because that's when the Russian investigation was in its infancy, but also at its most popular with the public. So you had Sally Yates, who was going to refuse to do Trump's travel ban. She was fired very dramatically, almost like I would say the left would call her a martyr, because she believed in her position so much that she would be fired for it. And I don't think people like Rex Tillerson.
Yeah, in fact, it was so substantial that we ended up terming it the Monday Night Massacre.
Yeah.
Just a kind of play on words of the Friday Night Massacre, of when Nixon, amidst the whole Watergate scandal, he fired a bunch of his attorneys, I believe it was.
Yeah.
So that is how important the Yates firing was in terms of the Trump presidency, as well as like so early on. It was 10 days after he was inaugurated, and that signaled that there was a level of urgency basically related to getting things implemented early on in his administration.
Yeah.
And when he wasn't able to get that control of his administration, he understood that he had to make some very heavy-handed decisions. And now I don't think that he's thinking along those lines anymore.
So, going to Sean mentioned that it was a massacre. It's very similar to the Saturday Night Massacre, as you mentioned, with Nixon. The reason that it wasn't just like a murder or something, it was a massacre because Sally Yates was obviously fired, and then Dana Boyente, who was the United States attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, was ordered out of the State Department. She took the office and ordered to enforce what the Justice Department said. Then Daniel Ragsdale, he was the one that was demoted and replaced by Thomas Homan. So all in all, it was a very dramatic, like, series of events to get the travel ban passed, and the travel ban now, though implemented, it's done so poorly that you can't really say anything about it.
Yeah, very much.
Then you had Michael Flynn, obviously.
Michael Flynn, I think, was one of the most rattling
Dude, the boy.
resignations from the Trump administration, because he was the kind of leeway that led to this whole Russia debacle and the unraveling of this case. Now, personally speaking, I don't think Trump directly was affiliated with the Russian government to let him win the campaign. I think there's a lot more layers to that, as we'll talk about later. Not only with the people that were fired, but also with people taking into context Donald Trump Jr., who met with a Russian lawyer by the name of something Veselnitskaya, something like that. So there are definitely layers to it. And Michael Flynn, people like Michael Flynn, who are affiliated so closely with the Russian government, is what has plagued the Trump administration at this point. The kind of murkiness that is related to the Russian government's involvement in the Trump campaign earlier, and their involvement in making sure that he stays in office without the possibility of impeachment.
He was in there for like 23, 24 days. He took office the 20th. He left on the 13th of February.
February 13th.
So this guy was barely in office, dude. And it's not. I don't think he worked with Russia. But I think it's impossible to deny the fact that he was influenced definitely by Turkey's government, because like a week before the election, he had an op-ed published that was pro Turkey. Even though previously he had shown that, like, I don't agree with its policies, I don't agree with Erdogan, suddenly he's flipping it. So that's what caused the government to start to investigate him. Dude, but if Michael Flynn had just toughed it out, I think the Russian investigation wouldn't be that bad. The fact that he resigned so quickly, I think that triggered people to say, oh, there has to be something.
Exactly. That highlighted the murkiness of the entire case.
Like for Nixon, right? He had... like for Spiro Agnew, right? As soon as the investigation into his corruption started, he also resigned. So that made people like that's when they realized, okay, it's true, and that he just let the investigation happen. But now,
when you make impulsive decisions like that historically, especially for part of some sort of governmental administration, that kind of shows that there is some sort of murkiness going on.
Yeah.
In terms of like what's going on in the back doors cannot be hidden for very long.
Yeah.
And that's kind of becoming less and less opaque as the Russia investigation unravels, as Robert Mueller continues to investigate Trump administration officials, cabinet members, and anyone who is in any way closely affiliated to people like Manafort, Michael Flynn, or any Russian
oligarch or anything.
Yeah,
Oligarch,
government official. Yeah.
talking about trying to get the Russian investigation off. The day James Comey got fired, I was convinced that Trump was going to get impeached within the week. I was like, you can't not impeach him, because that was, no one expected him to fire such a highlighting official. Because you have to remember, James Comey has had kind of a love-hate relationship with the Democratic Party.
With both parties, in fact.
With both parties. Like, first, what was it? First, the Republicans were saying, "Oh, he's a hero," and he was the left was blaming him for saying that. They blamed him for the emails and like making that like the investigation right before the election.
They blamed him for reopening the election right before, the investigation about 10, 12 days before the. Even though it was before election.
He gave a letter to Chaffetz saying we might reopen the investigation, and then Chaffetz announced like 2 days later, like, yeah, they're reopening the investigation. We're going to flame this chick. So the left hated James Comey for that. Then within like 6 months, everyone is touting, oh, this guy's another martyr.
This guy's a martyr for his own cause,
And then the right is like, oh, he's horrible. Come on, you can't investigate the president.
And a month and a half or something like that before, they showed that Comey had already drafted his Clinton pardoning letter before he would even announce that her actions were consequential. They were really they were stupid. What she did was really irresponsible, and what they found out was that he had already pre-written a memo that he would present to the public. So that also really triggered a bunch of people on the Republican Party, and Trump even tweeted about it too. It shows that there is a love-hate relationship coming between both parties, but there's a power dynamic going on. That Comey is at the center of the power struggle going on between the Democratic and the Republican Party, and it shows how they'll kind of manipulate any issue to tout their own agenda, or to tout, whether or not Trump is a legitimate president.
I think it's interesting to note, though, that if you're hated by both sides, I think that kind of shows that if you're in a position like him, it kind of shows that you're doing your job right.
Yeah.
Like, as an FBI director, you're kind of supposed to be partisan. Like something like Secretary of State, right? How the president wants you to do diplomacy, that makes sense. You can be partisan. Stuff like Secretary of the Treasury, obviously, you're going to, if you have Reaganomics or like Bernie Sanders, socialist kind of economics, that'll change. But some of the positions, like the head of the Justice Department, head of the CIA, FBI, that stuff is kind of like resolute. It's kind of set in stone. So when he shows that, he's willing to be attacked by both sides, and he kind of just doesn't care. I think that kind of shows an impressive character that I don't think a lot of people in the Trump administration had or currently have. What else was there?
We took care of...
Did we mention Preet Bharara?
Yeah, Preet Bharara was also a very, very... he was a top-level U.S. attorney. He was a New York district attorney for the Southern District of New York. And he's been the attorney for the Southern District of New York since 2009, all the way up to 2017. So he's been doing this for a very long time. In fact, he has a podcast series now to talk about his experiences. So, the market's really getting a bit saturated at this point. But I think he has a very interesting story to tell.
And the best part is, so what happened was, on March 10th, right? Okay, so the thing is, a lot of people forget, firing every single attorney, right? Yeah. It's technically in the president's power, okay? It's not an enumerated power in the Constitution, but what it is a necessary and proper clause portion of it, because the three branches, right? The Congress passes the laws, the executive, they enforce the laws, and then the judicial, they decide what can be a law, like constitutionality. So the bureaucracy is all in the executive. So the things like the judicial, CIA, the State Department, all of that, because they're part of bureaucracy, they fall under the executive branch. So yes, when he was able to fire James Comey and Preet Bharara, it was in his power.
Yeah.
As a district judge. but it was super shady, considering the fact that you just don't fire 46 U.S. attorneys, and you don't do it for every single district. Like, if you fire a district attorney for like someplace in like Idaho, okay, you know what? I'll deal with that. Okay, whatever,
Yeah.
that's cool. But if you do it for the Southern District of New York, because that's New York City, so he has the power to prosecute Wall Street. That's northern New Jersey, so there's a lot of corruption there. So
In fact,
is that also part of Pennsylvania?
Yeah. And Preet Bharara's made a career for himself out of exposing Wall Street scandals and frauds. So the fact that Trump chose to fire him after his recent cases against Wall Street executives and Wall Street bankers came to light, this kind of throws a bit of shade on Trump, who claims to be someone who will put Wall Street in their place, who will impose taxes that will prevent them from engaging in predatory behavior, and then he fires someone like Preet Bharara, one of the few people in the Southern District of New York who chooses to take on Wall Street head on.
Yeah, like its jurisdiction is massive. Okay, so the jurisdiction is this: it's New York, so that's Manhattan, the Bronx, Westchester, Putnam, Rockland, Orange, Dutchess, and Sullivan. So now that doesn't seem like physically that much, right? But you have to remember, the same way that the District Court of D.C. is powerful because it investigates Congress, this is powerful because it's able to investigate Wall Street. They're the only one. That's like when the appeals happen, that's where it goes up to. So he's like a trusty guy. He's a trustworthy guy.
Yeah.
People from both sides of the aisle have trusted him with investigating corruption. He's extremely critical of what happened in 2008. So he's not a partisan guy. But then when you when you fire him, right? And he's saying, I'm going to investigate or help with the Trump investigation. Oh boy. That once again, just like with James Comey, don't make impulsive decisions. It's going to blow up in your face. And that's exactly what happened.
Exactly. Okay, moving on to the next group of people
Yeah,
who fired. Actually, group is an understatement in this case. This is now directly involving Russia. Now we're going to be talking about the 755 U.S. diplomats
Oh, boy.
who were expatriated from Russia, who were fired and released by Putin on July 30th of 2017. And that was one of the biggest moves made by Russia as retaliation to the continued
body.
investigation of the
Big
House House Intelligence Committee that were involved in the alleged collusion scandal between the Russian government or Russian government officials and the Trump campaign, as well as the Trump administration.
Oh, okay. 755 U.S. diplomats in Russia. That's
a
massive.
lot. That's a lot. We're
Was
not
it-
going to get into Trump's response to that later, but we're not going to get into that until later. But for now, 755. That's a lot of diplomats. That's a lot of diplomatic power that has been rescinded from Russia that the U.S. Had before. And I think this is retaliation to Obama right after Trump won the election, but before January 20th. I forgot the exact date. He closed down a bunch of Russian, I think, embassy centers or something like that, intelligence centers. He closed them down, and he expatriated a bunch of Russian diplomats who were alleged hackers.
It was what he kicked out were people in the United States. They were not technically part of the Russian mission in the United States. I mean, by mission, I mean like the delegates or like representatives. So it was kind of shady, like government officials in the U.S. right near Washington. Like, okay, so that explains it. Classic espionage. But then Putin, when he did something that like always happens, he got blasted once again. There's just so the things with that. How Trump didn't respond. He was fine with it. He was like, oh yeah. Didn't he say they're cutting down our costs, right?
Yeah, they're cutting down our costs. We don't have to employ 755 people now. The government doesn't have to pay them. That's something like those funds we can allocate to other programs or something like that. Like that's not the typical response you'd have from a diplomatic backlash like this from a country that you alleged that you would improve ties with. And Russia, after Trump has won, whether you're on the left or on the right, you have to admit they've gone on the aggressive now because they understand that this is the opportunity to advance their position on the world stage as well as in terms of U.S.-Russia diplomacy, because under Obama, and especially when Hillary Clinton was the Secretary of State, they weren't allowed to do that. They had to engage in economic deal-making rather than political deal-making under Trump. It's much more easy to engage in political deal-making.
You have to be fair. You can't say that Russia caused it because we just don't know. So we can't make statements that we don't know. But they were definitely satisfied with the results. They were like, okay, we're definitely fine with this. All right, now just moving on a little bit. For someone that had based a majority of his campaign on economic reinvigoration, it's very interesting to see that his White House Economic Advisory and Manufacturing Councils kind of just, once again, just blew up in his face. People were hating his decisions. They were mad that his cabinet was the richest in U.S. history. They were mad that it wasn't really doing anything. And everything that it was doing was not really supporting the U.S. economy, which is still piggybacking off of Obama's reduced deficit. So now, August 9th? So near the end of the summer, both of the councils failed. These are supposed to be the councils that help the president decide what to do with the economy, and they both blew up. Not just the economy, not just advising, should we lean left, should we lean right, libertarian, Green Party, whatever. This is economics, so you have that, and manufacturing, so you have companies that are supposed to be on his side.
And most of the people here resigned after he pulled out of Paris, as well as after the events of Charlottesville and Trump's response to the events that occurred in Charlottesville in August, not the one that occurred a few days ago. We'll get into that in our Charlottesville episode. That would be episode 5.
Yes, this is like the original Charlottesville.
Yeah.
Like the first one.
Yeah. So the Economic Advisory and Manufacturing Councils, them quitting is kind of the socioeconomic model of business, and that basically suggests that businesses, while they have a responsibility to provide to their shareholders and to make an earnest profit from selling goods and services to their customers and marketing it in ethical ways, they recognize that they have a social responsibility to kind of appeal to people. Well, not really appeal to people. They have a social responsibility to call out inherent racism in society and Trump's negligence in calling it out for what it actually was.
We're not naive, okay? We know that they're doing it for the PR. They resigned from the board. They're on the left. They're the cool guys, whatever. Wait, actually, quick stop about that. Did you know Mark Zuckerberg today completely switched his position? I'm convinced he's running for president. I was telling Darishik about this in art history. Well, I'm just talking about that's cool. But what happened was, Mark Zuckerberg, who's a known atheist, he's been an atheist. Today he was like, religion and God are very important in my life. I was like, he's running for president. You don't just say it. Do you see it?
Yeah.
It would be so funny if Mark Zuckerberg is the guy we choose. He's like the opposite of Trump. For everything besides social media, he's the opposite of Trump. So yeah, that's just a quick note. Moving on, besides that, the elephant in the room, Stephen Bannon, the chief strategist of the president.
Actually, before Bannon, because I have a lot to say about Bannon. Before Bannon, you want to talk about Mark Carallo. I don't think we need to talk much about.
Sean Spicer?
Attorney for Donald Trump in his campaign, and he was fired in July 20th of 2017.
He's the lawyer that got a lawyer.
Yeah. Okay, he's Mark Carallo. Moving on. Sean Spicer.
Spicer.
So he was the person who was most recognized, after the whole Emmy stint and after the whole Melissa McCarthy stint. He was the one that was best recognized as someone for his PR gaffe.
This is the This is the largest. I'm gonna. This is like the largest. What's your time? Yeah. So talking about who were we talking about? Spicy. He was like. This was the largest inauguration crowd of all time.
Period.
The best crowd.
The best crowd we've ever had from people from people who attended and people around the world. And he didn't take any questions. That was sort of a monologue, which is unprecedented for a press secretary to ever say.
The best part is, this is the first day.
It wasn't even the first day. He was supposed to come to work. He was supposed to officially show up the first day of the next week. In fact, instead he showed up that day just to emphasize on how large the crowds were.
Right.
He wasn't even supposed to show up that day, which took the press by a storm. They weren't even supposed to come that day.
That makes it even better. That makes it so much better, because it's like, it just this is the most important thing that I'm dealing with. This crowd size. And you just know that Trump forced him to go out because his ego just couldn't stand, Oh, my crowd size weren't big enough. Oh, I got beaten by 2008. So then he had to go out, get his press secretary, who's supposed to be the representative of the executive branch to the media, one of the most important relationships in the government. He sent Sean Spicer to talk about the size of a crowd. No one cares. Get on with your life. And then
Bilal just got a bit fired up, guys.
And then the best part, then Sean Spicer tries to get jobs from a bunch of like obviously after he left, he tried to get jobs as a correspondent, right? To be part of Fox News, whatever, right?
Yeah.
MSNBC, which who knows if it's left or right or up down, whatever at this point. He's trying to get a bunch of jobs. You know why he couldn't get one? You know why he's currently not on any of these news shows? Because they saw that the public sees his lack of credibility.
His lack of credibility was further reinforced by his continuation of the gaffes that he made as press secretary. One of the major ones after the whole "this is the largest crowd in history" period gaffe was the fact that he said Hitler. Hitler didn't even in response to the Nazis the sarin gas attack. Allegedly
in Syria,
in Syria by the Assad regime, he said even Hitler didn't stoop down to using chemical weapons against Jews.
I was like, that's not how this works.
There's something called Zyklon B. I don't think he studied history very well. I don't think he knows what Zyklon B is.
You can Wikipedia this. Just find.
And the good thing is he apologized. The bad thing is he said it in the first place, and he's supposed to be the press secretary. If he made one simple Google search before, and I don't think this is completely his fault too, because I think he has a speechwriter, and his speechwriter is 99% to blame for this. The other 1% is Spicer because of the fact that it made it through him. Yeah. He still said it at the very end of
the press secretary. Okay, they have two jobs. There's two parts to the job, but what most of us have been seeing is the second part, and that second part is the question and answering section, right? So each day he'll come out and give an address about what the president's policies are, and then he'll be asked questions, or he would have been asked questions. Not to she, because it's Sarah Huckabee Sanders. But anyway, so his part was pre-planned. It's not like he was on the spot. He was planned how he was going to respond, and you would have think he would understand that, okay, the president's going to take action. This is the biggest news story. He would at least be prepared. So even if he didn't have a written statement, if it was off the head question, right, like he was just asked it, you'd think that he would know something about the event. And he's like, oh yeah, the Nazis, what they do? Lamau, nothing. But no, you need to know. It's literally your job to know this stuff. Okay. Anthony Scaramucci. I'm not even like.
We actually didn't plan to talk about Scaramucci. We actually forgot about the fact that he got fired in the first place. And this just goes to show you how many people got fired. Some people even went above the radar. No, we completely forgot about it.
The best part is, and this is a substantial list.
So he was, everything. Yeah, he was basically the boss of Sean Spicer, and now would have been the boss of Sarah. For 10 days, from July 21st to July 31st, he was the White House communications director.
Do you use that as a unit of measurement now?
What?
10 days or 10.
10 days. 10 days is a very long time in terms of Trump. That is a Scaramucci. That's a solid Scaramucci.
That's the official unit of measurement. It's a Scaramucci.
Like Sally Yates, she Scaramucci'd a term.
She Scaramucci. Yeah, Sally Yates was a Scaramucci. And then what was it? Michael Flynn was like 2.3, 2.4 Scaramucci.
Yeah. So anyway, Anthony Scaramucci was more of a comic relief character in the whole Trump administration fiasco because he's the person whose tape where he cursed out Bannon. Bannon was the one that he most prominently cursed out. He also cursed a lot. I don't know what he was cursing about other than the whole Bannon thing, telling him to give himself fellatio. Anyway, so yeah, that happened. And then he just got fired because it was bad PR for someone who controlled the PR coming from the executive branch. Not much to talk about there. He's just a New Yorker doing New Yorker things. Now, okay, you know what? We're going to save Bannon for a little bit later. A little bit later. Two more people I want to talk about before we get to Stephen Bannon. One of them is Sebastian Gorka, who was one of the strategists and advisors to the president. Not the chief advisor, but he was one of the key advisors. He's an economic nationalist. He is an isolationist, anti-globalist, self-proclaimed anti-globalist.
Does anyone really know what he is? He's just
honestly, he's just that guy that showed up to Fox News every night to talk about how great Trump is. No. That is his role. He was, every time I used to open Fox News, that guy used to be on there from 9 to 10 on either Sean Hannity's show or
Have you ever
someone,
had that one
Kimberly
Indian
Doyle's
uncle
show.
that like will show up to a dinner party right after having watched like 4 hours of Fox News, and then they get like a little bit tipsy? That's
A
Steve
little bit.
Bannon.
Just a little bit.
That's Steve Bannon, but all the time. Like imagine him when he's drunk. That's insane. Okay.
Steve Bannon drunk is Anthony Scaramucci, except a little bit less tipsy.
Scaramucci, the legend, though. Like, he just said it. Okay. Oh, one other thing. If you guys want to know another unit of calculation, a spicy is 183 days. So there are 18.3, the calculation ratio for the Trump administration, 18.3 Scaramucci's equals 1 spicy. So there you go.
Pretty much. That's how we measure time now.
That's how we
because
measure time.
One
Exactly.
year is pretty legendary to still be a part of the Trump administration after a year. So that was Gorka. And now, before we get to Bannon and Price, those are the last two we're going to talk about before we cut to our second segment after a short break, will be Paul Manafort. Paul Manafort was never officially part of Trump's administration. He was the initial campaign manager for the Trump campaign. And he was fired by Trump because, let's not kid ourselves, because he was in bed with the Russian administration for a very long time. And this isn't something new. He's always been in bed with Putin. He's been in bed with the Duma for several years before the Trump campaign was even a concept. And the fact that Trump hired him was a huge mistake on his part. Shows that he's not very well, shows that he's not good and well equipped at hiring people to do the job. And Manafort got Trump and his entire campaign involved in a lot of fiascos regarding Russia.
Just so you guys realize like how long of a time this is. There was not a warrant, but I think the investigations into Paul Manafort began back in like 2013. Just think about how long that's been 4 years of investigation, and now it's finally culminated. So like if Paul Manafort takes down Trump, even though they're completely unrelated up until the campaign, oh, that'd be glorious. Because you have all of these different connections. Like Trump has been having, there's some random like, did you hear about this back in like 2013? Random Russian accounts would just tweet at him like, you should run for president, stuff like that. It would be like Twitter accounts, and that'd be their only tweet back in 2013.
Yeah, exactly. There was a bunch of them. In fact, going off of that, Paul Manafort also, not about the accounts, but he had a bunch of alliances. He had he had some equity in Ukrainian companies. He was dealing in Ukrainian businesses that were friendly with Putin and were friendly with the Putin administration. Ukraine is divided between anti-Putin and anti-Russia and pro-Putin and pro-Russia. And usually the pro-Putin people are the ones that get to live and, basically continue to do business. And Paul Manafort had some equity in the companies that were pro-Putin in order to remain solvent and, not disappear off the face of the earth one fine morning.
So he doesn't just have a political motive, which, let's be real, isn't everyone's main objective. The one thing everyone can get behind is an economic motive. Like, okay, I need to make sure that I don't fall into debt, that my company survives, that I still make money. That's what got Paul Manafort. And the thing is, that's also one of the easiest to track. Like, you don't know if your corruption, you can't bribe or you can't directly link someone saying, I'll give you this position for a vote. That's why when you look at stuff like the corrupt bargain or any other selection of a nominee, right? Like for the cabinet, you can't, like for Betsy DeVos, who we'll get to, we can't directly link if Betsy DeVos was chosen because of her brother being part of the private military corporation and Trump showing support for that. We don't know that, right? But we can say is follow the money, and that's exactly what Robert Mueller's doing. That's why he's fired. That's why Trump fired people like Preet Bharara, who specialize in Wall Street corruption. So everything just points to there's not
follow the money, follow the finances.
Follow the finances. I can't. Whenever I start to get like too hype, oh boy, I can't even speak properly, boy.
And now, speaking of hype and economic motives, we will move on to the main firee of the Trump administration thus far, Stephen Bannon. Steve Bannon. Well, the first thing I want to say,
Bannon.
Well, first of all, I want to say something that not a lot of people might know about Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon is someone. Well, first of all, he's a Harvard graduate, and after he was a Harvard graduate, he was a West Point graduate, I believe he was as well. And he was a U.S. Navy.
He was in the Navy.
He was in the Navy for I think 7 or 8 years. He was a lieutenant. from 76 to 83 or
Which
something.
is respectable.
Which is-
Getting up there. That's
1976 to 1983. He was largely apolitical while he was in the military, and about 3 years into the Reagan administration, 1983 was when he left the Navy. Basically, he went from apolitical to a Reaganite. He became someone who supported trickle down economics, who championed capitalism much more. He started to call out democratic, not really scandals, but shortcomings in the Democratic Party, such as the many flaws apparent in Jimmy Carter's presidency that he couldn't quite see before. And then he started to move even more right as the religious right rose during the 80s. He was not a very religious person. He's a self-described street fighter who wants to champion rightist causes. I won't say Republican because he just happens to be part of the Republican Party. He completely hates the Republican base, probably more than not the base, the elite and the establishment, more than he hates the Democratic establishment. He's made that very clear.
the thing is, I would argue that Steve Bannon is a smarter guy.
Steve Bannon, if you
Than
see
Trump.
his 60 Minutes interview with Charlie Rose, that is one of the
He's oddly eloquent.
very eloquent, and what he said, everything he said made perfect sense. Like, he's not someone
From
that
his perspective.
you'd expect to be blabbering on like freaking
Like
80-year-old.
Alex Jones.
Like,
He's not Alex Jones at
He's
all.
not Alex Jones at all. People who work for Alex Jones are more eloquent and smarter than Alex Jones.
Like the best way, it's like if Alex Jones, if Alex Jones had the flow
Yeah.
of like Milo not Milo. Oh my God, what am I saying at this point? Who's the Stephanopoulos of Stephanopoulos?
Stephanopoulos, yeah.
That's what Steve Bannon is. I'm looking it up right now. He's gone to Virginia Tech, a pretty good school. Then he went to Georgetown University School of Foreign Service. That is amazing.
Yeah.
Getting to School of Foreign Service, that is amazing. And then he earned an MBA with honors from Harvard Business School. That's amazing. He knows what he's doing.
And another thing, I actually read this off a New York Times article about a few months before he was fired. Like, everyone knew that he was going to be the chief strategist, but this was a few months after Trump was inaugurated. What drove him to kind of be an economic isolationist who wanted to be a Wall Street, like a person who wanted to break the trusts of Wall Street and break the corporate mergers and oligopolies that are now forming and completely clearing out competition in many key industries, was when his dad had a bunch of stocks that he owned. I forgot, I think it was AT&T or something. He had a bunch of AT&T stocks, and those stocks his father had for over half a century, I think. He kept them to just remain financially solvent. He never saw the need to sell them. And then as soon as the as soon as the media called that in 2007 or in 2008, like in early 2008, the stock markets would start to crash because of the toxic CDO dealing of Wall Street. And it happened, and he had to sell his shares. The shares that meant a lot to him. Steve Bannon grew up hearing about those shares that his father had for almost 40 to 50 years. And all of a sudden having that taken away from him because of the foolishness and the irresponsibility of Wall Street choosing to launder people's money and speculative behavior by dealing out these toxic CDOs, that drove him to becoming an economic isolationist. He didn't move to the left, which is very, very astonishing to me after something like that. These are all the signs of someone who would move to the left. But instead, he moved farther to the right. He moved farther on the economic isolationist scale, and he started to champion capitalism and non-crony capitalism. In fact, he was the one who proposed a 44% tax. Now it's at, I think, 35%. A 44% corporate tax. There's a 9% corporate tax increase on the richest 1% of this country. Something that many establishment Republicans, even
They're
Republican
staunchly
commentators,
against.
are staunchly against. Exactly.
It's like, oddly enough, I agree with a lot of his positions. Most of them, actually, until it gets to government size. Now, he believes that the government is ineffective as a flaw. I think it's good that it's ineffective because it should be by design. Now, wasting money on that I get. Like, if you have superfluous branches, like if you have a state government doing something that could be done by the national government, one of those should take over. But if you have, like for Medicare and Medicaid, right, I believe that should just be administered by the national government because that's a national law. That's just my opinion on that. So what he says is we're wasting money on having these different levels of federalism, right? She says that it should devolve, like happened with Reagan and Bush, completely, of course, not a bad thing. If you want to devolve the government back into the states, that's just a political position. But he thinks dual federalism is a flaw. I would argue it's by design to make sure that you don't have any hasty change that is done at the swing of the moment, right? Like you don't want to have, you want to make sure that there are braces in place for stuff like healthcare, for stuff like utilities, so that if there's a swing of opinion of how it should be regulated, the entire system just doesn't crash.
And just to wrap up with the Steve Bannon.
Yeah, because we want to get onto those.
Yeah. So just to wrap up with Steve Bannon, we'll talk about Tom Price, but it's going to take like a minute. Just to wrap up with Steve Bannon, the reason why he's so hated by the left, not because of the way he looks, obviously, but because of the things he says and the way he says them. He says what basically Trump says in a more eloquent manner, which makes it a little more disturbing for people on the left and a lot of people on the right. He is a staunch economic nationalist, anti-globalist, and this is what he said in his 60 Minutes interview. He is staunchly against H-1Bs, the visas, the work visas that foreign companies issue for their employees to work in the U.S., complete maybe 1 year of not financial, but training in their expertise, and then going back to the country in which they came from, continuing working for the company, retraining or upgrading in some cases, and the H-1B makes that possible for people from other countries to come to the United States for job-related reasons. He is staunchly against that. In fact, he himself has said he wants Silicon Valley to be filled with more white, black, and Hispanic people in this country who came from Mexico, who obviously came from parts of Europe back in the 16 and early 1700s, black people who are pretty much still disenfranchised in the area of tech because they're disproportionately represented by tech. He wants more of these people. He's staunchly against importing Chinese and Indian tech workers from other countries to kind of dominate Silicon Valley, especially people who aren't citizens, people who are there because of their H-1Bs, people who are there on visas, green cards. He is
people that aren't U.S. citizens or nationals.
Yeah, immigration-wise, he's an isolationist, and economic-wise, he sees what Wall Street did in 2008 as an economic hate crime. He sees what the top 1% are doing as an economic hate crime. It's just that his means to fulfill the same ends as many on the left are very different.
I mean, I completely get what he means.
In terms of policy, it's not really, he doesn't defer that much. 44% tax.
Look at his policies, it's not that far from Bernie Sanders.
It's really not.
Is implementation. And of course, why? That's a big thing. Bernie Sanders, he's in favor of supporting U.S. businesses because he wants to strengthen the U.S. economy. That's what he pushes. And to help pay for his systems, right? For the infrastructure that he wants to implement in stuff like rebuilding the road system, hospitals, stuff like that. Steve Bannon, he's pretty openly like, these migrants, they're just taking our jobs. We need to get them back. So the public perspective is also a really big thing. People just view him as the white nationalist when really he's just kind of more of an economic protectionist, like Teddy Roosevelt.
An absolute economic protectionist. And the last thing I want to say about
that's just
Bannon, the very last thing I want to say about Steve Bannon, and not even Bannon, but the entire cabinet in general. I feel like the id, superego, and the ego of the entire cabinet. The ego is basically the person who balances the superego and the id. Your visceral and your more leveled, moralizing things. So, like aspects of your character. That is the role that Trump has to play and has continued to try to play in this administration. I believe his id in this administration has been Bannon, the economic nationalist, the people who want him to appeal to the people on the right and get the people on the right to vote in large numbers, something that the people on the left have not been able to do for the Democrats. And that's what Bannon's really good at, advertising the kind of policies that the people on the right want to hear. He is their id. And the superego, the kind of moralizing figure, are people that we'll talk about later, people who are key members of his administration, people who are high members of his cabinet, Tillerson, Mnuchin, Mattis, to a certain extent John Kelly as well. These are the people who have either served in the military, served in other companies. They're masterminds when it comes to corporate decision-making and decision-making in general. They're the people who keep Trump grounded and battle this kind of impulsive decision-making that Bannon sometimes descends into in trying to appeal to Trump's base, and Trump's the mediator between them.
I think the best way to say it, this is just my spin on the topic, but Trump, it may not, if you don't agree with just what Sean said, it's not super, it might not be super ego, it might not be it, but he definitely has an ego. And that's kind of driven, that impulsiveness when it comes to his own personality has driven a lot of his decisions when it comes to who he's going to fire and who he's going to hire and keep, which is going to be the second part of our topic. So right now, we're going to take a quick break, and then we're going to come back to topic 2, which is the construction and deconstruction of the cabinet.